G'day everyone, I'm Smokescreen and welcome back finally to another video. And after a completely unplanned fortnight hiatus, I am back with the last of the Nations Cup test season number 3 for Nations Cup. Apologies for the slight disappearance in the last couple of weeks. I had a tooth taken out, and then I had a visitor, so that was 2 weeks of my time just taken, so I couldn't make these videos. But we're finally here, and we're finally showing you what I got up to in the Nations Cup Test Season 3. As I sit here recording this commentary today, the official season has since been announced, so that means that these Nations Cup races that I'm showing you, or the race in today's video, is part of the very last test season for Nations Cup. But what are we driving? We're driving the Radical around Fuji, and there was a very interesting dynamic that I discovered around this round. Have a look at my gear changes here. That's a strange way of changing gear. Normally it just sort of changes, but there's like a little hashtag that happens in between when I change the gears. That is because, for some reason, for this test season at least, you were allowed to use an actual shifter. So I have my Logitech wheel, my G29, and I connected up the shifter to it, and you're able to do your manual shift. So you have to engage the clutch, pull the next gear on the stick, release the clutch, and I was able to do that in this Radical. It was very interesting to be able to do that because of the way the gear shifts actually work in this particular game. But we will talk more about all the little intricacies surrounding that in a minute. We're going to get through this qualifying session for now, which doesn't get off to a great start as we make a mistake on this notoriously dangerous curb on the exit of Coca-Cola Corner at Fuji here, turn number 3. So that lap was really nothing spectacular. It was a 56.3. I was really looking to be able to get a 55. On my second flying lap, I had a really good first corner, and then I sort of get caught out on this dangerous curb once again, and I sort of get stuck on the curb a little bit, and it sort of pulls me too narrow for 100R, and I end up getting a cut track penalty. So once that curb ends, you have to be back on the tarmac, and I wasn't, so therefore I get a penalty. And I'm not going to stay on the track because the penalty serving zone, there's only one now, so the penalty gate is at the start of the main straight, so you get a penalty. It also wrecks your next lap. It's not like you can serve it on the same lap. You get the penalty and it's all done and dusted. It impacts your next lap, so cancel back to the pits. That deletes your penalty, but of course you have to redo an out lap. We come out just behind Atom. We make sure we don't get in his way, but then he obviously wasn't on a hot lap, so he sort of drops in behind for some slipstream. I don't mind because I know that my gear changes give me a quite significant straight line speed advantage. So that's really all you have to know for now, is that the gear shifts are a lot quicker on the shifter, so they're really good to use down the straights. So as we exit the final turn there, we're finally going to get on with a qualifying lap here at Fuji. Just executing our manual shifts, flat shifting as well, so we don't even lift off the throttle. You can if you like, but I think it's faster to flat shift here, which we're doing. You can see that gap we've pulled to Atom as we head down the massive 1.475 kilometre long main straight here at Fuji. Coming into turn 1, we'll be looking on the left-hand side here. We'll be braking just after the 150 metre board, down the gears, using the paddles for the downshift on that particular time. And we exit there in 3rd gear. So again, this car with the manual shifts, of course, you still want to minimize, so you can exit the corner in a higher gear and you like avoid a gear change. Really good there. Just before the 50 metre board, slight dab of the brakes, turn in, keep it in 4th. We are a little bit wide there. You want to just not carry quite as much speed through the middle of turn 3, and you can kind of commit to the throttle on the apex and not run wide on the exit. But we didn't quite do that, but it's okay. 100R, you can just lift and get through, but you might want to dab the brake and then brake it just before the 50 metre board, heading in towards turn 6. Turn 7 sort of continues out this exit here as we meet the outside, and then we head down 300R, easily flat, of course, through turns 8 and 9. Gap to Atom still fairly large, and then braking as we just pass the Dunlop sign, heading into the Dunlop corner, turn 10 here. Really slow, awkward chicane, short shift up to 3rd, and make sure we exit in 3rd, cut turn 12 quite a bit. Then coming into turn 13, looking on the right hand side, braking just as the pole reaches the edge of your screen. Meet that apex, sort of over a crest here, so it's easy to run wide. Now nice and gentle, up through turn 14, and as we turn into nets, make sure we meet that inside curb nicely, gently on the power. Don't run too wide because you need to get back to the left and brake just on the end of the barrier on the right, nice and wide to get a straight exit out onto the straight. Tiny bit of oversteer there, and that's just flat out. Atom's clearly gained through that section, but as we accelerate down the main straight using the manual shifter, we're going to be gaining quite a lot of speed, and this particular lap felt a lot better than that first one with no glaring errors, and we finally come across the line with a 55.1. That's actually a fairly decent lap time there, only about a tenth and a half off Andrew, who is the gold standard in the region. We come across that first sector split to continue on, and we were 2 tenths down, so there's no point giving Atom a tow. Don't want to give him a tow if I'm 2 tenths down. So that marks the end of our qualifying session. Currently, provisionally on the front row. We'll have to see where that puts us after the brand new Nations Cup introduction. Beautifully done, I must say. A brand new sort of graphics package for the Nations Cup introduction. Really, really cool. We were able to keep this provisional front row here, so it's going to be a standing start with false start check off the front row in Oceania top split alongside Andrew Lee. Something we're going to do is a manual shift off the start, and look at that speed advantage I get on Andrew. It's just absolutely astronomical. And as we head down in towards turn 1, we're on the inside with no one ahead of us. We've got to make sure we don't run deep here, because my strategy for turn 1s is basically slam on the brakes as soon as I see a brake light up ahead. But because I haven't got one, I had to judge it myself. I missed a shift there, crucially. Damn it. That's what happened there. So you saw I got stuck in neutral. There was like an N where the gear number was supposed to be. It's because I released the clutch slightly too early before the gear stick had actually engaged the next gear. I just lifted off the clutch a fraction of a second too early, and we're probably talking like less than a tenth too early, and it just like clunks. You grind the gears, it doesn't find the next gear, and we lose a load of speed. So we had a really good start, but that of course is the downfall of the shifter. And as we head down the 300R once again in Andrew's slipstream now with Noodles 4 tenths behind me, we got to make sure we get it pulled up here, don't run deep at the start of the race on the cold sports hard tyres, and we get up through this section nice and cleanly. Now, the strategy for this particular race today is a mandatory pit stop, but no mandatory tyre compound, and the tyre wear isn't even high enough to make the tyre change even worth it. So the only reason we're going into the pits is to fulfill the pit minimum, the minimum number of pit stop requirement, which is 1 in this particular case. I could tell that I was a little bit off the pace here, a little bit off the pace of Andrew, a little bit off the pace of Noodles and Ranger Oz behind. So my thinking here is I didn't want to get stuck in a big battle because I was much more consistent out in clean air on my own. So I'm actually going to fulfill my pit requirement at the end of lap 1. Now remember, we all go into the pits in this race, we all have to, but the tyre change and the refuel is not required. So it doesn't actually matter when you go into the pits, it's simply to do with how your own race is going in terms of traffic. Let's see what this can do for me. I like it, Tez. Bloody beautiful idea. And Tez is the only other driver that follows me, and you can see straight through the pit box there, stop and go. That's actually not entirely unrealistic. It looks silly to have your car stop and then go, but in some categories in real life, that's how a pit stop is done. Like, I think timed GT car races, I think some of them have a mandatory stop, but like you don't need to change tyres, so they stop and have a minimum pit time, which I think it's like a minute or something, which isn't quite the same here. But I think in terms of this particular race, that mandatory stop is actually absolutely fine. But while we're in this clean air here, we're going to talk a bit about the dynamics of the shifter and why I was gaining so much down the main straight. It's a lot to do with how the gear shifts in this game work. So when you drive a car that is actually when the physical car is fitted with a manual H-pattern gearbox, you can still use your paddles on your, wheel input, and what that does is the game will then execute a manual shift for you. So it'll the game, you pull the paddle, the game will, you know, push your clutch in, it'll find the next gear. So that's why, like, a lot of road cars have a clunky gear change, because the game is simulating what a H pattern shift might be like. However, when you have a manual shifter plugged into your wheel, you're able to use it to do the gear changes instead, and you can actually physically change your gears a lot quicker than the game. So what happens is when you're heading down a straight, you can shift the gears yourself. It's a lot faster than everyone else pulling the paddle and doing let the game do the shift. It's a lot faster, so you gain a lot more speed down the straight. And the other interesting thing as we round the final corner here, and I do believe a load of people come into the pits here, the other interesting thing is that you don't actually have to commit fully to either gear change method. I was using a hybrid of the shifter and the paddle wherever each made the most sense. Oh, I don't really want these people also pitting. So the game would actually listen, for lack of a better word, to your most recent input. So if I pulled a paddle, it would then be listening for the paddle. As we come out sort of with the rest of these people from up ahead, I sort of didn't really want this, because I kind of did that early pit stop to get out of this traffic, but Ranger, Oz and Noodles have just pitted on the next lap, so I'm kind of back in the traffic, which I didn't really want. I kind of expected this group to sort of pit a little bit later in the race, but you can see we've come out just ahead of Ranger Oz, who went slightly deep on the exit of the pit lane, and we were able to get a nice little switchback maneuver, and we find ourselves ahead, which is quite important here, because that will give me the best possible advantage down the straights with my manual gear shifting, but I sort of won't be held up by them, and they will struggle to try and keep up with me down the straight. But as I was saying before, the game is listening for the most recent input. So what I was doing is I was using the shifter down the straight, and the way the game would sort of begin to listen to the shifter is by the clutch press. So I'd press in the clutch and it'd go, okay, I've got to listen for what the shifter's doing, and then I'd slot the shifter into the next gear and it'd do the manual gear change. And then while I was heading down the straights, because I think you could imagine in the braking zones how difficult it would be to actually be doing the manual downshifts as well, in terms of sort of how easy that would be to make a mistake and mess up, I wanted to be using the paddles in the braking zone. So what I was doing actually down the straight, and you'll see, or you won't actually see it, but I'll tell you what I was doing as we head down the main straight. Ranger Oz gets a slight little overlap as we head through the final turn, but he's not able to get past there. He's really close though, but as we head down the main straight, you can see I'll do this gear change up to 4th, and that gap behind immediately starts opening up. It's about 0.2 of a second now, and every time I do a gear change, that gap will exponentially increase. The gap will accelerate, and what I was doing after I did a manual shift into 6th, because this is the top gear, I would pull the upshift paddle on the wheel, so then that would sort of tell the game, okay, the input I have to listen for is the paddles, so then when I hit the braking zone I could downshift with the paddles. If you don't sort of make the game begin to listen to your paddles, and you pull for a downshift on the paddle after your most recent input was a manual gear shift, it would simply slot the car into neutral and you wouldn't get the engine braking, so you'd go deep into the corner. So it was a little bit strange, the whole experience, and like you can see here, I clearly have a very large straight line speed advantage, and I think it does kind of beg the question a bit, should I have used it? And you know, maybe the answer morally is no, but it's the same for everybody, so everybody would have been free to use a shifter if they had put the time in to also learn how to do it in the best way possible. I do think it probably does need to be banned in sport mode, just like it was in GT Sports. You actually couldn't use your manual shifter in sport mode races on GT Sport. You could use it in time trial and in single player, but as soon as you jumped into a daily race or jumped into an FIA race, as it was called back in GT Sport, there was no way you could actually use that shifter. And I think it probably does need to be the same here, because then all of a sudden you don't know who's using what shifter, and then yeah, it can all get a little bit confusing as to why you're racing somebody that clearly has a massive straight line speed advantage, which is what's happening here. So I think you can begin to see at this stage, I'm obviously not quite on the same pace as everybody else, especially through that 3rd sector, and it doesn't help that I actually hate that section of track. I think the 3rd, or the final sector at Fuji, is one of the worst sections of a racetrack on the planet, so it doesn't help that I'm also slow through there. I think I'm slow through there because I don't like it and can't be bothered to learn it properly. But then I gain it all back out on the main straight here, and you can see I'm still ahead of Ranger about half a second. as we sort of finish up lap 5 here, I find Atom in the pit lane, and he was sort of just behind me when I went in for my pit stop. And you'll see as we head past the pit exit here, that's him in the red car on the pit exit. It's looking pretty good here. He's gained quite a lot of time, and I think he actually found a trick on pit entry that saved him about a second. I think he discovered there was a line on pit entry you were able to cut and not get a pit line cut penalty, so he was saving like a second on everybody else who was trying to keep it sort of in between the white lines for the entire duration of the pit entry, including myself. So he's able to gain quite a bit of time on everybody because he did discover that trick, and I guess that's sort of in the same vein as the H-Pat shifter that I discovered. So I think we're all just discovering bits of the game still. We'll see how they sort of handle all of this in the official season. So I've now got 3 cars directly behind me, and that does put quite a bit of pressure on. In some practice races, I was able to get a few 55s in the race, and now in the official race here, I'm only in the 56s, so I'm clearly feeling the pressure. I don't feel ultra comfortable sort of swapping back and forth between the gear shift methods either, because I find the whole thing a bit weird. I feel like if they wanted to have the manual gears sort of available, the manual gear shifter, it should sort of force you to commit to one, whereas you can actually switch back and forth between a paddle shift and a stick shift. So that was quite weird. Obviously, if you want to make someone commit to the stick shift, you also run the risk of messing up downshifts in the braking zone. So I think that probably kind of evens out. But we've got these cars right behind. You can see they're side by side behind. I think that's Atom and Ranger on side by side, and they're right on my tail here. And as we exit the final corner, we actually get a better exit than Atom. That gap's opening up, but then the gap's going to open up even further as we begin to do these manual shifts. So slam down the clutch, grab the next gear, couple more people in the pit lane, Top Gun Wolf, Corey Hack, all in the pits. That gap behind has opened up to like 7/10 now. It was about 3 or something as we exited the corner. That gap is physically a lot bigger as well, and we find ourselves up in 5th. So this is the good thing about the pitting early strategy, and the fact that I've been in clear air. I haven't lost as much time as I easily could have if I was just behind or just in this pack of 3. So what I'm actually doing is jumping a lot of people that got stuck in argy-bargy for a good couple of laps. You can see that there's actually quite a large group heading through turn 13 now, so a load of them are actually going to pit, and hopefully we can gain gain some spots that way. Heading up through this sector again, we'll see Ranger Oz half a second behind, and he's immediately gained like a 10th through that really slow, awkward chicane. He gains a little bit more time through here as we don't quite optimise the exit. Still about 4/10 as we head up through turn 14, turn 15. Meet that apex. It's actually not a bad little apex there. That was actually a decent turn, but we've lost about a 10th to Ranger Oz once again as we head through Panasonic up through the final corner. Ranger Oz gets a little bit of an overlap here. He's got an overlap on the right-hand side of my car, but once again, because I have this manual shift that I'm doing, I just have this straight line speed advantage. So every time Ranger Oz shifts, the engine cuts out for a little bit of time as the game does the slow shift for him, but I'm able to override that and do the shift a lot quicker. And look how much speed I gain down the straight. But uniquely on this particular on this particular occasion, the advantage is sort of minimised because Ranger Oz is as close as possibly can be. I brake as late as I possibly can. Ranger Oz gets completely up the inside as we head through turn 1, and on the exit here, I think he exits in second and has to do an extra gear change there. And then because we have a couple of manual shifts heading through turn 2 up towards turn 3, I'm able to haul ahead of him. I don't go all the way to the right-hand side of the racetrack there because I don't want to cut across the front of Ranger Oz. But as we head through this middle section now, as long as we can sort of head into this upcoming hairpin at turn 6 ahead of Ranger Oz, I should be okay to stay ahead of him up until the main straight again. But he's really close this time, about a 10th behind, but he doesn't go for that move as we meet the apex through turn 6 absolutely beautifully, and then we finally got a straight section which during which we're pretty safe in terms of a move down at the upcoming corner. So heading down the hill, got to make sure Ranger Oz doesn't actually go for the send of the century. Get on the brakes as late as we can, get it pulled up. Ranger Oz right behind as well, with Atom and Noodles closely in tow. And heading up through here, Ranger Oz is clearly quite strong through here, and he's only 2/10 behind me now. He was about half a second behind me last time, and he gained a couple of tenths. So he's really close this time, and he's right on my back bumper now. He's right under the rear wing. Looking down on the radar, of course, he gets a slight overlap up through here, but it's going to give him the wrong side for the final turn. He doesn't sort of sort of hang with that move. Actually, he does look slightly around the outside, takes a wide entry, cuts back for a later apex. You can see that down on the radar, but as we exit out onto the main straight, he hasn't quite got that as correct as he would have wanted to, and now he's given himself quite a large gap, which is only going to increase as we head down the main straight. So it was 4/10 at the beginning, and as we sort of head up into the upper echelons of the gear range here, up into 6th gear, that gap is just opening up exponentially. You can see it's now 6/10. We've gained 2/10 down the straight on that particular occasion, and as we head once again into the braking zone for turn 1, it's going to be quite clear he's not going to be close enough. He's half a second behind, definitely not close enough to go for a move, and he doesn't get the best exit through turn 1 either, and that is going to be that little battle done and dusted. He's right off my back. He's a little bit off my back bumper now, so it gives me a little bit of breathing room through the middle part of this lap. But as we sort of rejoin the action at the end of the same lap, so we're on lap 9 now, Ranger Oz once again really close heading up through this final sector. So you can definitely tell where each of us sort of focused all of our practice. I focused on getting sort of the dynamic between, you know, getting the gear shifts right with the manual shifter and the paddles, and working out how to make the car listen to each one when I needed it to. Whereas I think Ranger Oz has just taken the more traditional approach of maximising the entire track. So I clearly am a little bit off the pace, especially through this 3rd sector here. But because I've focused the time on the gear shifts, it's given me a straight line speed advantage, which I personally think in a racing situation, having a straight line speed advantage is a lot better than actually having a handling advantage. Even on a handling track, if you get yourself in a race, in a handling car on a handling track, if some bloke rocks up with a power car, they'll be able to keep ahead of you on all the straights, so it's going to be really difficult to actually get those moves done. But as we head into the braking zone, once again, we got the last few laps of the race now. Ranger Oz gains a lot of time under braking there. Actually, that gap opened up ever so slightly. It was about 6/10 at one stage. As we exit turn 1, he has actually got a much better exit there. But once again, of course, manual gear shifts I'm able to gain. I get the best first sector of the race there, up on Andrew's fastest lap of a 55.3, so that's maybe slightly promising. And the fact that he's in the lead, that kind of confirms that that first sector may not be as perfectly optimised as it could be for Andrew, because he won't have been using the slipstream. But as we head into here, got to make sure Ranger Oz doesn't go for it. He doesn't go for it that time, and I think there's still a couple of people from up ahead still yet to pit, so I don't even think 5th position is sort of the correct equalised positions in terms of pit stops here. Ranger Oz using the slipstream, heading down towards the chicane one more time. On the brakes, he's gaining under brakes. Does he go for the move? He does sort of look to the inside a little bit, but I just meet the apex before he's able to get an overlap through there, and I get a slight little slide coming out of the chicane there, and that's put Ranger Oz really close. He's 2.5 seconds behind, 2.5 tenths behind rather, a quarter of a second. He gets a slight overlap through turn 13. He's going to be on the outside for turn 14, but if he brakes slightly earlier rather and cuts back, he can perhaps get a little underlap on the exit. He has a go at it. Look at him, look how close he is. He returns to the outside of the track. He's going to try this once again. He's going to take a really wide entry into the final turn, late apex, as late as he can, and he's got himself a really good exit there. He's gaining so much time. He's going to be less than 2 tenths behind as Green Goldfish from up ahead heads into the pits. I wonder if anybody else is going to pit as well. That's put Ranger Oz right under my rear wing, and even though I'm doing the manual shifts and getting a straight line speed advantage, Ranger Oz has quite strong slipstream here, and you can see he's actually gaining towards the end of the straight despite the differences in the gear shift method, and he's looking up the inside because I didn't defend it, and he meets that apex absolutely beautifully. A slight bit of contact on the way through, but absolutely nothing wrong with that. He was clearly ahead, and that's Ranger Oz taken. So he's taken the 4th position off me, and I probably could have got a slight overlap there, but turn 3 is not the place to do it. What I was looking at this stage was to just keep as close to him as possible through this section, and trying to do that through the 3rd sector is going to be quite a tall order, because Ranger Oz clearly had extra pace than me, and the fact that he's now sort of been released, he's no longer stuck under my rear wing. He's probably going to get quite a lightning 3rd sector, and the fact that he's already gained about 6 tenths on me, he's now 6 tenths up the road. I think it's going to be quite difficult to actually get this back, even with my straight line speed advantage. The only thing I can possibly hope for is that the additional slipstream effect will help in my quest to retake this 4th position, but Ranger Oz has done really well. I've now sort of got quite a bit of pressure from Atom behind, who's only less than 3 tenths behind now. He's once again a quarter of a second behind. Slight slide up towards turn 13, and that's just going to lose me a bit of time as that gap to Ranger Oz opens up to 0.8 of a second. Atom's still about 0.3 behind. Make sure we get a really nice exit out of here, probably on the throttle a little bit later than I would have liked, but it's even later. But Atom's power application was a slight bit later. Andrew's in the pits now. I don't think we'll probably quite jump him, because he's a long way up the road. He was ahead of me when I went into the pits, and I've sort of been stuck in this little bit of a battle here. I finally set myself a 55 actually on lap 9, which is good, but Andrew is clearly in the consistent 55s, whereas I'm in the 56s. Meta7 and Crimson also in the pits. I jumped the pair of them, and as we use this slipstream of Ranger, I was heading down towards turn 1 once again on the pit exit. No cars to be seen, so we've jumped a couple of people that were slightly out of phase yet to pit, and we find ourselves equalised, fighting for this second position. So I would have had second if I was able to keep Ranger Oz behind, but it's clear Ranger Oz definitely was the faster driver here. I mess up a gear change there, and it slots into 5th instead of 4th, so that puts me slightly further off the back of Ranger Oz than I would have liked, because what I'm looking for now is the only last possible thing I can hope for to win this race is to be close enough out of the exit of the final turn and get the drag race up to the finish line. But that's going to be quite difficult, because if Ranger Oz does not make a single mistake, which he's yet to do in this race, he hasn't really made a mistake yet. He's driven very, very consistently, very, very cleanly. It's been an excellent battle once again with Ranger Oz. You know, it's going to be quite hard to get this, especially from half a second back. We're not going to gain half a second in half the length of that main straight, which is all we've got left as we're going to exit onto it through the exit of this third sector. We'll get it pulled up for the chicane really, really nicely, actually. That gap closes down by about half a tenth through there. Commit to the power, short shift up to third. We've actually gained ever so slightly through there. It's slightly less than half a second now, and all we've got to do is focus on the exits. Don't run wide. Don't get a penalty. As Ranger Oz catches a slide heading up through turn 14. Really, really hairy moment there, but somehow he's managed to get through there a lot faster than me, as that gap has opened up to 6.5 tenths as we speak. The gap is about the same behind to Atom. I'm not too worried about getting dragged past by Atom because of this straight line speed advantage, but as we exit the main straight, 6/10 gap ahead and behind us. Distinct Andrew takes the win. Congratulations to him. And as for this second position, which we were fighting for this entire race, Ranger Oz is just going to be able to keep it. Bloody Ranger Oz, fair play, mate. I don't know. Does that feel hollow? I don't know. I don't know how I feel. Obviously, big congratulations to Ranger Oz, showing the composure and overhauling me for that second position, even though I gave myself an advantage. So really a testament to Ranger Oz's skill in this Oceania region. But I think the question in my mind is, do I deserve this 299 point result? Wow, that's actually a really strong point showing there for this top split. Obviously Andrew taking 327, but I was that close. I was 4 tenths away from my first 300 pointer completely, on my own. I have got a 300 point result before, but only because I had the position gifted to me all the way back in Goodwood in the Mini Coopers towards the end of GT Sport. But yeah, the question is, should I have used the shifter? I used the shifter, and it obviously gave me a big advantage and helped me get this 299. But I think the overwhelming consensus of the community after they saw what I was doing was, well, it's allowed, it's not outlawed, and I took the time to learn the shifter, so maybe I earned it. But let me know down in the comments. Personally, my thoughts is it does need to be patched. It needs to be either completely banned, or it needs to be made so that it forces the driver to commit to the paddles or the shifter, because I was using a hybrid between the two and kind of deleting a disadvantage of the shifter. So not only was I giving myself an advantage down the straights, I was also removing the disadvantage from the increased difficulty of the shifter, making it easier to make a mistake in the braking zones, because you really can't afford to be missing downshifts in the braking zone, especially when you need to be engine braking as much as possible in these little radicals. But a pretty strong result to finish up this, what was the second round of the Nations Cup Test Season 3. I think all 3 rounds counted, and I missed the first round, so I'm not even going to get a representative total, but all I can do is do the best I can in the races I do decide to do, and I think we've done pretty well that in this first round that we've done here But that's going to finish up this video today, so do hit the like button if you enjoyed, and do subscribe if you'd like to see more videos and streams from me. Do leave a comment as well, as questions, comments and constructive criticism, as always, very much appreciated. But that's going to be the end of this one today, and that means that is it from me. So once again, I do thank you very much for watching. See you later.